December 16, 1944, 05:30 hours. The Schnee Eifel, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The air was a blade of ice, silent save for the muffled, irregular cough of tank engines preparing to move. Snow fell thick, insulating the world in a deceptive blanket of peace. Below the frozen skeletal trees, the largest gamble of Adolf Hitler's war was about to begin, the massive offensive later known as the Battle of the Bulge. But this thrust was not merely steel and shell. It was built on a foundation of theatrical deception, a secret weapon crafted not in a factory, but in a psychological laboratory. The German High Command had conceived a plan so audacious, so utterly reliant on sheer theatrical chaos, that many of its own generals dismissed it as the fantasy of a madman. It was called Operation Greif, Operation Griffin. The architect was Otto Skorzeny, the commando celebrated across Germany for his daring rescue of Mussolini. Skorzeny was a man who understood that in modern war, perception was often more lethal than penetration. His mission? To assemble a brigade of men fluent in English, equip them with captured American uniforms and jeeps, and send them behind enemy lines to sow confusion, redirect traffic and, crucially, seize the critical Meuse River bridges before the Allies could react. "My orders were simple," Skorzeny later recounted, his eyes glittering with the memory of the sheer scale of the deception. "Create chaos where order was essential. Turn their own logistics against them. Make the GI believe that the man standing next to him, the man driving the supply truck, was not who he seemed." The strategic irony was profound. The German military machine prided itself on meticulousness, discipline, and technical perfection. Now their survival depended on the absolute mastery of impersonation, on the very things they often scorned in the soft American forces: colloquialisms, mannerisms, and cultural shorthand. Skorzeny's elite unit, the 150th Panzer Brigade, was a grotesque masquerade. They were equipped with captured Sherman tanks painted with Allied markings, wearing uniforms collected from prisoner-of-war camps, and speaking a language not their own. Yet there were fundamental flaws in this technological disguise. The German tanks, despite their hastily painted stars, still sounded, smelled, and moved with a distinctly Teutonic rigidity. And the men? They were soldiers first, actors second. The primary targets were the American logistical and communication arteries. An intelligence officer from the American First Army, reviewing reconnaissance reports just days before the offensive, dismissed the activity. Their moving personnel, standard exercises, nothing to indicate a major push. The Americans were watching for the movements of tanks and infantry, the known signatures of war. They were utterly unprepared for the silent, theatrical invasion that began under the cover of the blizzard. As the spearhead of the German panzer division slammed into the unprepared American lines, the first jeeps of Operation Greif, driven by commandos like Lieutenant Günther Schultz, were already cutting through the freezing, chaotic night. Schultz wore a clean, slightly too new American uniform, carried an authentic M1 carbine, and wore the steel helmet of a U.S. Army engineer. Everything was perfect, except one thing. His entire worldview was German. He understood the language of war. He did not understand the language of a GI. In the confusion of the American retreat, Schultz and his team were able to pass through several checkpoints, offering misleading directions, cutting telephone lines, and causing genuine localized panic. The mission was working. The enemy was paralyzed not by superior firepower, but by the chilling realization that the front was dissolving and the rear was porous. A whisper was spreading through the freezing foxholes. "There are Krauts among us." This suspicion became the true weapon. Soon, American military police began to question every soldier. It wasn't about verifying papers, it was about verifying identity. The fate of Operation Greif, and perhaps the entire German offensive, now hung not on the performance of a tank, but on the commando's ability to convincingly answer the cultural trivia of an enemy they had never truly understood. The irony had begun to bite. Skorzeny's men were masters of strategy and engineering, but they were about to be undone by the minutiae of American pop culture. The simple, everyday questions were the landmines, and Lieutenant Schultz was driving straight toward the first one. If you wish to continue this narrative, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these untold stories of technological and human drama from the past to light. Now, let's return to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, where a simple question is about to decide the fate of a man and a battle. December 17, 1944. Night. A crossroad near Malmedy, Belgium. The fog of war had been replaced by a psychological haze. In the American rear, a new kind of defense had sprung up, replacing machine guns with scrutiny. Every GI was now a potential investigator. The commandos of Operation Greif had been technically perfect in their disguise, but technique was failing against the human element. Lieutenant Gunther Schulz's jeep rolled to a stop at an impromptu MP roadblock. The MP, Sergeant Frank Riley, was unshaven and bone-tired, clutching a rifle not for protection, but for sanity. The air was thick with mistrust. Riley shined his flashlight into Schulz's face. "Papers, driver." Schulz, having practiced this moment hundreds of times, delivered his lines perfectly in passable, if slightly formal, English. "Lieutenant Miller, 9th Engineers. I'm carrying priority plans to Liège. Please move aside." Riley took the ID. The photo matched the man. The stamps were authentic, captured documents from the initial breakthroughs. Technically, everything checked out. But the gut, that most ancient of battle sensors, was sending a warning signal. "Slow down, Lieutenant," Riley said, not moving the barrier. "Say, what's the name of Mickey Mouse's girlfriend?" The question hung in the freezing air, utterly banal and completely unexpected. Schulz's mind raced. He had memorized the rank structure, the difference between a P-38 and a P-47, and the location of every fuel depot. But cartoon characters, these were not strategic targets. Schulz hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. He finally offered a name from a forgotten propaganda briefing. Minnie." Riley squinted. "Minnie? With an I?" The true irony of Operation Greif was not that the Germans failed to learn the language, but that they failed to learn the culture. A German engineer, focused on the perfection of a V-2 rocket, would never consider a comic strip essential intelligence. The Americans, in contrast, were fighting a war in Europe, but still living an American life defined by Hollywood, baseball, and comic books. This seemingly harmless exchange was the beginning of the end. The Infiltrators possessed the logos of America, the technical details, but lacked the pathos, the common emotional understanding. The question was not about Minnie Mouse. It was about the shared experience of being an American in 1944. Word of these cultural security questions spread like wildfire. Initially, they were simple. Who won the World Series in 1944? The St. Louis Cardinals. What state is Omaha in? Nebraska, but the American understanding of its common name, not its geographical position, was the key. A GI would know these answers instantly. A German commando would have to retrieve them from a hastily prepared briefing note, betraying an unnatural pause or a slight too correct pronunciation. The captured German commandos, once interrogated, revealed the scale of Skorzeny's plan. Suddenly, the entire rear of the Allied line was on edge. The psychological impact far exceeded the actual sabotage. Bridges were closed. Entire columns of genuine U.S. troops were delayed for hours. Generals, including the famously fiery George S. Patton, were forced to answer trivia questions before being allowed to cross key junctions. Patton was furious, recalled a staff officer, but he complied. It was maddening but necessary. The fear was real. Every shadow became a Kraut, every unfamiliar voice a potential assassin. We were fighting ourselves. The Infiltrators had successfully sowed chaos, but the weapon had turned on itself. The chaos wasn't paralyzing the American strategy, it was hardening the American resolve and causing a logistical traffic jam that slowed the German advance as well. The lack of cultural fluency was now leading to arrests, and every arrest exposed more of the plan. For Skorzeny's men, the situation turned from a high-stakes adventure to a terrifying hunted game. They were caught not by a slip in their forged documents or a flaw in their uniform, but by the absence of a shared childhood memory. This was the ultimate failure of technical perfection, the belief that a uniform and a weapon could substitute for the soul of a soldier. December 20th, 1944. 14 hours. The outskirts of Houffalize, Belgium. The arrests multiplied rapidly. Over the next 72 hours, American intelligence units, now hyper-aware, swept the forward areas. The captured commandos, including Lieutenant Gunther Schultz, were interrogated fiercely. Under pressure, they revealed their secondary objectives: the assassination of high-profile Allied commanders, especially Eisenhower. This information detonated a wave of panic across Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SIF. General Eisenhower was immediately confined to his headquarters, protected by a massive, layered security cordon. For days, his own security team was primarily composed of English-speaking soldiers from foreign units, the rationale being that a true German infiltrator would not risk impersonating a non-American GI. The psychological warfare had reached its zenith. The presence of Skorzeny's men, even if few in number, had successfully paralyzed key elements of the Allied command structure. It forced a massive diversion of troops from the front to the rear to secure roads, bridges, and command posts. However, the pursuit of the commandos also demonstrated the industrial and strategic flexibility of the American military. The response wasn't a rigid counter-infiltration effort, but a mass-market, democratic defense, a checklist. Military police were issued pocket-sized cards listing the most telling Americanisms, not just trivia, but common mistakes made by German speakers. One key tell, documented in an after-action report, was the pronunciation of the double L sound. Many German speakers, when saying fully or really, would pronounce the L's too distinctly, almost like two separate syllables, whereas a native speaker blends them. It was a subtle, almost invisible technical flaw in their perfect English. The hunters of Operation Greif, the elite commandos sent to disrupt and sabotage, were now themselves the prey, stalked by every MP, every bored private, and every nervous driver. Consider the fate of Sergeant Rolf Stürer. Dressed as a corporal, Stürer successfully rerouted a crucial American tank column away from a planned counterattack for 4 hours. He felt the cold thrill of success. But as he drove away, a genuine American supply driver, Private First Class Tony Vescovi, noticed something. Stürer's jeep was traveling too slowly and too carefully for a combat zone. Vescovi stopped him. "Hey, Corporal, what's the rush? You look like you're on parade." Stürer, who had practiced the American slang for hurry, paused, not understanding the sarcasm. He replied, "I must drive very safe. The road is slick." Vescovi then asked the simple question that broke the spell. "Who's the prettiest girl in the world?" Stürer, drawing from his limited briefing on Allied movie stars, proudly declared, "Betty Grable." Vescovi burst out laughing. "Betty Grable? You must be a relic, Corporal. Everyone knows it's Rita Hayworth now." The slip was minor, almost negligible, but the reaction was wrong. Stürer's response was academic, not passionate. An American GI would argue the point. A German commando would simply state the briefed fact. Stürer was arrested on the spot, his overly correct, unemotional response proving far more damning than any piece of faulty identification. The terror on the German side was now profound. The commandos had been promised a quick mission and a hero's return. Instead, they faced immediate execution upon capture, legally justified under the rules of war for fighting in enemy uniform. The fear of the noose, coupled with the realization that their sophisticated disguise was being undone by simple cultural knowledge, broke the resolve of many. The Battle of the Bulge itself was far from over, but the audacious element of surprise and confusion, the core of Operation Greif, had been neutralized. The German High Command's grand plan, to achieve victory through trickery, was disintegrating, undone by the very cultural details they had dismissed as insignificant. The technological and tactical precision of the Wehrmacht had been defeated by the sheer, unbridled popular culture of their enemy. December 22nd, 1944. Dawn. A forward observation post. American Third Army. The legacy of Operation Greif, despite its failure, was immense. It forced the Allies to recognize a crucial element of modern warfare: the vulnerability of the logistical and psychological rear. The seemingly trivial details of American life became crucial tactical assets. The phenomenon even spread to the American troops themselves. In a famous documented incident, 2 genuine American engineers were nearly shot by a patrol when they could not agree on the proper sequence of a popular marching song. The paranoia had metastasized, But the most significant operational consequence was the revelation of the German reliance on disguise. This gave Allied commanders an unexpected gift: psychological intelligence. It confirmed the desperation of the German position. Hitler was using commandos and theatrical deception because his main assets, tanks, fuel, and air cover, were dwindling. Operation Greif, in its unraveling, became a barometer of the Wehrmacht's decline. The interrogation of the commandos also provided a clear, if unintentional, blueprint of the German strategic intent. The goal was Meuse Bridges and Liège. Knowing this, the Allies were able to prioritize the defense of these key points, diverting critical reserves to reinforce them long before the main German armored columns could arrive. General Omar Bradley, commander of the 12th Army Group, later noted with stark irony, "Skorzeni's infiltration gave us a 24-hour warning, not of a local attack, but of the depth of Hitler's ambition. They were not aiming for a salient, they were aiming for the jugular. And we were able to close our fist before the blade arrived." The strategic significance of the Mickey Mouse question, or the Rita Hayworth question, was that it bought time. Every minute an American MP spent verifying the cultural bona fides of a suspected GI was a minute the German panzers were not crossing the Meuse. The industrial reality of the war further amplified this psychological victory. While Skorzeny had to cobble together a brigade from scraps, captured uniforms, worn-out jeeps, and personnel with rudimentary English, the American production lines were delivering thousands of M4 Shermans, P-47 Thunderbolts, and fresh troops. Statistics underscore the scale. German effort, Operation Greif. Approximately 80 commandos successfully infiltrated. 18 were captured or killed within the first week. The total number of captured American jeeps was less than 50. American industrial muscle. By December 1944, the U.S. was producing an average of 6,000 jeeps and 2,000 heavy-duty trucks per week. The German plot, built on limited resources and theatrical bluff, was overwhelmed by the sheer relentless scale of American manufacturing power and manpower. The captured commandos were treated harshly. Those caught fighting in enemy uniform, including Lieutenant Schultz and Sergeant Sturer, were court-martialed and executed by firing squad. Their deaths served a dual purpose: a harsh deterrent against future infiltrations and a psychological victory for the Americans, demonstrating the high price of cultural deceit. The psychological terror, however, left a lasting mark. Even after the collapse of the Bulge offensive, the American military was forever changed. Security protocols were refined, relying less on paper documents and more on human factors analysis. The lesson learned was that in a conflict of total war, no detail is too small, and the shared cultural identity of a nation is its most powerful, invisible shield. The American GIs had been tested by a phantom enemy and emerged more cohesive, more suspicious, and more culturally unified than ever before. January 1945. SHAF Headquarters, Versailles, France. The Battle of the Bulge concluded as a devastating German defeat. The last desperate strategic throw had failed, consuming irreplaceable men, fuel, and equipment. Operation Greif, the most audacious part of the plan, became an exemplar of this colossal miscalculation. The central irony of the operation, the taming of the technologically superior but culturally arrogant German military by the banality of American popular culture, was not lost on the war's historians. Skorzeny himself managed to survive the war. In post-war debriefings, he reflected on the core failure of the operation: the assumption that a uniform and a correct vocabulary were enough. "We trained them in the language of the military," Skorzeny stated, reviewing the fatal flaw. "We gave them the technical manuals. We neglected the language of the man, the common soldier. We taught them the word jeep, but we did not teach them how an American curses when his jeep stalls in the mud. This was our blindness." The ultimate legacy of Operation Greif was not the sabotage it inflicted, which was negligible. Its legacy was psychological and historical. First, the creation of a new kind of paranoia. The fear of the infiltrator forced every army in the future to consider cultural security as seriously as physical security. It established a precedent that has been followed in every major conflict since, from Vietnam to modern counterinsurgency operations. The concept of the cultural fingerprint was born in the snowy forests of the Ardennes. Second, the confirmation of the German decline. The attempt by Hitler to substitute illusion for substance proved that the Wehrmacht no longer possessed the industrial capacity or the manpower to defeat the Allies by conventional means. Operation Greif was a theatrical admission of strategic bankruptcy. The sophisticated German war machine was reduced to playing dress-up. Third, the human drama. The story endures because it encapsulates the sheer terror of fighting an enemy that wears your own clothes. The experience of the genuine American GI was one of extreme psychological stress, the forced requirement to become an intelligence officer, questioning every friend, every commander, every ally. The trust that holds a military unit together was temporarily shattered, replaced by the chilling question, who are you, really? The image that defines this chapter of the war is not the clash of tanks, but the confrontation at the roadblock. Sergeant Riley, tired and freezing, asking a man in an American uniform a ridiculous question about a cartoon mouse. It was a test of cultural immersion that a German commando trained to conquer nations could not pass. The commandos of Operation Greif believed they were conducting a masterstroke of military espionage. They were, in fact, unwitting actors in a dramatic play that revealed the chasm between two warring cultures. The Americans were fighting with Hollywood, baseball, and comic strips as much as with artillery shells. The Germans, fighting with technology and rigid doctrine, failed to grasp the fluidity of their opponent's identity. The high-stakes game had ended, the infiltrators were identified, the bridges secured, and the German offensive was being ground down by logistics and willpower. The commandos' sacrifice was futile, but their story remains a powerful, dramatic lesson. In the final count, the technical genius of war can always be defeated by the simplest, most human detail. They thought the uniform was the disguise. It was the mind that betrayed them. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the secret war within the Battle of the Bulge. If this story of technological deceit and human vulnerability resonated with you, please ensure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Let us know in the comments below. What other obscure, high-stakes operations of World War II deserve a closer look?